The sun had started to dip below the horizon when Leah and her friends found themselves on a stretch of deserted road that twisted through the mountains. They were deep into their cross-country road trip, somewhere between Tennessee and Georgia, following an off-the-beaten-path route suggested by a local. Their goal was to make it to a hidden campground before nightfall, but the sky was quickly turning from a soft amber to a deep, unsettling indigo. "What's the GPS saying?" asked Leah, her voice tight with tension. "Nothing. No signal," muttered Jake, tapping his phone with growing frustration. "It's like we've entered some kind of dead zone." Leah's best friend, Ashley, sat in the back seat, nervously chewing her nails. "We should have seen signs or something by now, right? I mean, we've been driving for hours." "Relax, it's just a scenic route," said Sam, who sat beside Jake. "The guy at the gas station said it would be beautiful to guess he forgot to mention it's a ghost town." The road stretched on, long and empty, the only sound the hum of their car engine and the gravel crackling beneath their tires. Darkness crept in like a slow leak, swallowing the last bits of daylight. Trees flanked both sides of the road, their branches knotted and twisted, like hands reaching for something unseen. As they rounded a bend, a figure appeared in the distance, a lone hitchhiker standing by the roadside. He was tall and thin, wearing a faded flannel shirt, his face obscured in the gathering dark. "Creepy," muttered Jake, but he didn't slow down. Ashley leaned forward, her voice low. "Maybe we should stop? He might be stranded or something." "Not a chance," said Jake, eyes fixed straight ahead. "We're not picking up strangers in the middle of nowhere." As they passed the hitchhiker, Leah felt a shiver run down her spine. His head turned slowly, eyes following the car. She couldn't see his face clearly, but she felt his gaze burn through the glass, lingering on her as they drove by. Just as the hitchhiker vanished in the rearview mirror, the engine sputtered, coughing like an old man gasping for breath. Jake's face went pale. "Oh no, not now," he groaned, pulling over to the side of the road. He tried the ignition again, but it only whined in protest. "Are you kidding me?" Leah said, her voice shaky. "The middle of nowhere, no signal, and now we're stranded?" Jake popped the hood and stepped out into the night, holding up his phone's flashlight. Sam followed him, muttering, "This is insane. That guy at the gas station is dead meat if we make it out of here." In the silence that followed, Leah and Ashley sat alone in the car, staring out at the pitch-black road. The silence was thick, oppressive. Leah glanced at her friend, catching the same unease reflected in Ashley's eyes. Minutes ticked by, the men's voices murmuring from the front of the car. Suddenly, the night air was split by the sound of a branch snapping somewhere nearby. Both women froze, eyes darting into the trees. Another snap, this time closer. Leah reached for her phone, fumbling with the flashlight, casting a weak beam into the darkness. But all she could see were trees, stretching out like skeletal hands. "Leah," Ashley whispered. "Look." The hitchhiker was there, standing in the middle of the road, staring at them, his face finally clear in the glow of Leah's flashlight. His skin was pale and taut, his eyes hollow, sunken like deep pits of shadow. But what made her blood run cold was his smile. A twisted, empty grin that stretched too wide, revealing teeth that were sharp and inhuman. Leah opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, she frantically pounded on the window, trying to get Jake and Sam's attention. "Jake! Sam! Get back in the car!" Ashley shrieked, her voice barely breaking through her panic. The men turned, catching sight of the hitchhiker. Their faces contorted in horror, and they ran back toward the car, scrambling inside. Jake slammed the door and hit the lock button repeatedly, as if that flimsy barrier would keep them safe. "Did you see him?" Leah gasped, heart pounding. He wasn't human." "I don't know what that was," Jake replied, breathless, "but we need to get out of here. Now." He tried the ignition again. The car groaned to life, headlights flickering before settling into a steady beam. Relief washed over them, but it was short-lived. In the headlights' glow, the hitchhiker was gone. "Where did he go?" Ashley whispered, eyes wide with terror. "Just drive, Jake," Leah urged. "Please, just go." They pulled back onto the road, speeding through the darkness, fear clawing at their hearts. But a few miles down the road, Leah glanced into the rearview mirror and froze. The hitchhiker was there again, standing in the middle of the road, grinning that same unsettling smile. "No, no way," she whispered, eyes wide. "How is he?" "Keep going," yelled Sam, gripping the door handle as if he could will the car to go faster. The road twisted and turned, and every few miles the hitchhiker appeared again, always the same distance behind them, as though he was tethered to them by an invisible string. "He's following us!" Leah screamed, her voice breaking with panic. "We can't get away from him." Jake's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "This isn't happening. This can't be happening." They drove for what felt like hours, but the hitchhiker never disappeared, his image growing larger in the mirrors, closer, his face twisted in that horrifying smile that refused to fade. "Turn off the road. Take the next exit. Anything," Ashley cried, her voice desperate. Finally, they saw a dimly lit road leading off the main one. Jake swerved onto it, the tires screeching as they tore down the narrow, overgrown path. The hitchhiker was gone from the mirrors. Minutes passed, and slowly, their breaths began to calm. No hitchhiker in sight, no twisted smile, just darkness and the quiet hum of the engine. "Did we lose him?" Leah whispered. But before anyone could answer, a loud, deliberate knock sounded on the window. It was the hitchhiker, leaning into the window, staring at Leah with those hollow eyes and that terrible, mocking grin. "Mind if I catch a ride?" he whispered, his voice low, rasping, filling the car like smoke. The screams echoed into the night, swallowed by the darkness. The car was found 2 days later, empty, abandoned on that lonely road. No sign of Leah, Jake, Ashley, or Sam. Only the faint smell of gasoline and something else, something dark and rotten, that lingered in the air as if the hitchhiker had left a part of himself behind. Locals say the road is cursed, and on certain nights you can still see a car driving aimlessly, searching for a way out, the ghostly figure of a hitchhiker following close behind. On the outskirts of an old mining town, hidden deep in the mountains, there's a stretch of road locals call the Devil's Backbone. Narrow, steep, and lined with dense, gnarled trees, it has a notorious reputation for strange occurrences and disappearances, especially at night. Most townsfolk warned newcomers never to drive that road after dark, but when Rachel and her husband Mark got lost on their weekend getaway, they didn't think twice about taking it. "GPS says it's a shortcut," Mark said, tapping his phone with a shrug. The sun had already set, and the temperature dropped sharply. Rachel pulled her coat tighter, watching as their small sedan wound its way up the mountain. The trees loomed, casting twisted shadows across the road. "Just keep your eyes on the road," Rachel murmured, glancing out the window, feeling the darkness press in. The first hour passed without incident, but the winding road seemed endless. Occasionally, they'd see a flicker of headlights through the trees, making it feel as though another vehicle was trailing them. But every time Rachel looked, the lights were gone. "Mark, did you see that?" she asked, her voice wavering as they passed an old sign, barely visible in the dim light. It read, "Turn back now." Probably just someone trying to scare people off. "Locals make up ghost stories all the time," he replied, forcing a laugh. But his eyes betrayed his own unease, darting toward the rearview mirror more often than before. Then their car lights started to flicker. Rachel's stomach twisted as the headlights dimmed, then came back. Just a glitch, she told herself, but dread settled in. The dark was now suffocating, and each flash of light illuminated the twisted forest surrounding them. "What was that?" Rachel gasped, eyes widening as she caught movement at the edge of the trees. "What?" Mark glanced over, eyes squinting into the trees. "I don't know," Rachel stammered. "It was tall, really tall, and it was looking right at us." Mark brushed it off with a nervous chuckle. "Rachel, it's just nerves. The trees are playing tricks on us." But a few minutes later, the headlights began to flicker again, this time accompanied by a horrible grinding noise from beneath the car. Mark gritted his teeth, forcing the wheel to stay steady. "We're almost through," he muttered, voice tight with tension. But as he said it, the car jerked violently to the side, as if something had pushed it from the trees. Rachel screamed, grabbing onto her seat as Mark wrestled with the steering wheel, struggling to keep them on the road. The grinding noise grew louder, and the car shuddered. Then, in the flicker of the lights, Rachel saw it. A figure stood in the middle of the road, blocking their path. A man, impossibly tall, with hollow eyes and skin stretched taut over his skull. His limbs were long and twisted, like dead branches, and he was smiling. "Mark!" Rachel shouted. "Go around! Go around!" But as Mark swerved to avoid the figure, the car spun, skidding off the road and coming to a stop just before a steep drop. They sat in stunned silence, breathing heavily, eyes wide. When they looked up, The figure was gone. "Did you see?" Mark whispered, his voice barely audible. Rachel only nodded, her hands shaking. But before they could process what they'd seen, a cold whisper filled the car. It sounded like it was coming from the back seat. "Why didn't you stop?" They both whipped around, but there was no one there, just the empty back seat. But the whisper persisted, filling the car, the words echoing in their minds. "Why didn't you stop? Drive! Mark! Drive now!" Rachel shouted, panic taking over. Mark hit the gas, but the car only lurched forward slowly, sputtering as if something were holding it back. Come on, he muttered, his voice tight with fear. Then they heard it, a scraping sound against the car's roof, like nails dragging along the metal. It moved from the back to the front, slow, deliberate, sending chills down their spines. They could feel it above them, something impossibly heavy, pressing down on the car. "Don't look up," Rachel whispered, grabbing Mark's hand. "Just keep driving." Mark nodded, forcing the car forward. The scraping continued, then stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. For a moment, they thought they were free. But then they felt it, something cold and damp, pressing against the back of their seats. "Why didn't you stop?" The whisper came again, right in Rachel's ear. She turned, catching a glimpse of a pair of hollow, staring eyes just inches from her face. She screamed, and Mark floored the gas. The car shot forward, finally breaking free of whatever force had held them back. They sped down the road, not daring to look back, until they finally saw the glimmer of headlights ahead. A gas station. They pulled in, stumbling out of the car, breathless and shaking. The clerk eyed them warily, taking in their pale faces and wild eyes. "Got yourself into trouble on the backbone, didn't you?" he asked, a smirk playing on his lips. Rachel and Mark exchanged horrified glances. "What was that thing?" Rachel stammered. The clerk shrugged, crossing his arms. "Folks say the backbone's got a keeper, something that doesn't like trespassers. He's been there as long as anyone can remember, asking people to stop just once. Those who don't, well, they're usually never seen again." Mark swallowed hard. "But we got away." The clerk's eyes darkened. "No one really escapes the backbone. Not if he's marked you. You might have outrun him tonight, but he'll follow you. He always does." Rachel's blood ran cold as she turned back to the car. She could swear just for a moment she saw a tall, twisted figure standing in the shadows by the trees, watching her with those hollow, empty eyes. They left the gas station in a hurry, desperate to put miles between them and that cursed road. But as they drove, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone, that somewhere in the darkness, something was following them, waiting for its chance to finish what it started.